Sounds good.
The mayor is in the building, but it's 12 o'clock, and this meeting is supposed to be over the lunchtime, so we'll begin, and the mayor will join us when he can join us. So, Jeremy, if you could start us off. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Good to see you guys. Kind of a rinse, lather, and repeat from last week. Brown bag last week, brown bag this week, another brown bag on Thursday. So we called this meeting to order to introduce you guys to the Main Avenue project. This will be the last segment of Main Avenue to be reconstructed in the metro, all the way from the Red River to west of West Fargo. We've got this program for construction in a year and a half, hopefully 2024. Knock on wood, we can bid out a project and start reconstructing this road and sewers. So a little background, DOT put out an RFP for a consulting team to do the project development on this project. And they hired Apex Engineering with the subconsultant of SRF Consulting. So we've got members of the engineering team here, got some North Dakota DOT representatives here, and Matt and Jake from Apex and SRF are here to give you a slideshow. So with that, I'll just hand it over to them. And feel free to interrupt on any slides you want and call up whoever you need to discuss the issue.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I think I saw the Mayor just walk in when we were getting started here. So appreciate the chance to talk to all of you today about this project and kind of where we're at in the project development and what's going to be coming up here in the next year or so. So Jeremy introduced us. I'll introduce myself again here. I'm Matt Kinsella with Apex Engineering Group, the project manager for the project. Also with me today, I have Jake Nordic with SRF. As Jeremy mentioned, Apex and SRF, we're kind of tag teaming this project for the city. So Jake is leading all the tasks for SRF as we get through this project. We also have a pretty large project review committee. Won't go through all these names, of course, but just wanted to acknowledge all of these people that have been really instrumental in helping us get through project development here. You can see we have DOT, Federal Highways, MetroCog, some other sub-consultants as well, in addition, of course, to all the city staff that are working with us. So before we kind of get into the details, I just wanted to orient everybody on where this project is at. So the map on the screen here, this shows the 4 miles of Main Avenue that exist within the city of Fargo. And of course, it's also US 10 here, in addition to being Main Avenue in the city. And you can see on the right there, the purple is the downtown project that was done a couple of years ago, 2019, 2020, is when that project was finished, and I think everybody's pretty familiar with that one. So the project that we're working on right now is in the blue. It's this last mile, as Jeremy mentioned, of Main Avenue that really hasn't been touched for a long time besides just minimal maintenance and things like that. Hopefully these stick drawings are not too hard to understand, but we wanted to develop a little bit of what the context is also surrounding this corridor. As I mentioned, there's 4 miles of Main Avenue within the city. So if you look at the top of the slide first, 45th Street to 25th Street, of course, has the 6-lane section. It's got 3 lanes in each direction. You have raised median, you have turn lanes through that whole area. And then to the east of our project, the mile that goes from University Drive to 2nd Street, excuse me, a little bit different section there. Of course, a lot of you are familiar with that, but we ended up with more of a hybrid section there. As you can see on the east end of it, it's more of a 3-lane section, 1 lane each direction with that center shared turn lane. And then as you head west, you develop that second through lanes. Of course, there's some parking mixed in there as well downtown. But it's kind of important to understand the context of these surrounding corridors when we'll talk to you today about some of the things that we're looking at for this particular mile stretch of Main Avenue. The other thing that's really important to understand about this particular corridor is how narrow the right-of-way is, especially east of 18th Street. Again, I think a lot of people are familiar with this stretch, but this is an example here. We basically have 60 feet of right-of-way to deal with for that whole stretch between University Drive and 18th Street. And for example, here at the Northwest Auto Body building, you can see a pinch. This is probably our tightest pinch point on the project. We literally have not just 60 feet of right-of-way, but we have 60 feet between those 2 buildings. This doesn't happen everywhere on the corridor, but there are a lot of buildings that are built right up to the sidewalk. And even if there aren't buildings, there's parking or there's paved areas or usable areas for those properties. So that's a real challenge, especially again with this stretch that's east of 18th Street. So with all these projects, we always start working with our project review committee team on establishing the true purpose and need for the project. Really, what are we trying to accomplish? And we did go through a lot of versions of this and worked for a few months with our project review committee. But it kind of boils down to these 4 items in more of a general sense. And I did want to highlight bullets 2 and 3 in particular. One of the things we really want to try to do out there is improve the pedestrian environment. Anybody that has walked out there or tried to take a bicycle or something like that understands how tight some of those sidewalks are. There's an example photo here on the lower left. You can see there's only about 28 inches there between that International Market Plaza building wall and that pole that's right on the edge of the curb there. And then, of course, somebody threw a box in the way too, just to make it even more difficult in this particular case. But this is something really important to the project team to look at opportunities to improve this environment. And then the other thing I wanted to point out too is there is a very high number of access points on this corridor. There's about 80 accesses within this 1 mile. And by accesses, I'm not just talking about the intersections, but private driveways that businesses use. So that's something that we are looking at as a team to try to close or consolidate some of those where we have opportunities to do it. Of course, we don't want to impact businesses in doing it, but there's a lot of duplication and redundancy. You can see the photo here. Within this 200-foot stretch, there's about 5 driveways. You can see the curb just goes up and down constantly. So we've been working hard to do that, and Jake's going to present a little bit of information later on how we've been successful in trying to close some of those driveways. So schedule and cost are always big topics, of course, on everybody's mind. So I wanted to just highlight these for you here today. So right now, our project schedule is to have this bid ready basically 1 year from now. That's our current schedule. So the project would bid probably sometime under this schedule in late 2023, November, say, of 2023. Would go to construction in 2024 then during that construction season. And again, that's our current schedule. We'll circle back to that at the end and talk a little bit about some things that could affect that. And then as far as cost goes, so right now, the DOT, of course, with this being on the U.S. and state highway system, they program these in well in advance. This was programmed in 7 years ago at about $15 million, and that's the amount that's programmed into what the DOT calls the STIP. And I've kind of broken that funding down for you here on the chart, and we can certainly answer any questions about this later if we need to. But you can see there are federal funds on the project, and then you have the state and city matches, and then you do have the city-only costs, which are typically for water main, sanitary sewer, things like that.
Just on that quick
Yep,
question.
absolutely.
On 32nd Avenue, we found our costs went up quite a bit to $20 million, right? Mm-hmm. That $15 million you have, is that with inflation or you're going to tell us right now?
It's a great question, Mayor, and I was going to touch on a few of those things here with this slide. So that estimate was done in 2015. That's just kind of the way that the programming process works. It's kind of an understatement, I think, to say that those costs are very likely to increase. Of course, we all know what's going on in today's environment. So I think the question then is, well, how would that additional project cost be funded? And I've tried to list out a few bullets there. Right now, it's hard to know exactly how it would be funded, but the good news is that those NHU funds, which is the federal funds, those are not capped. So if there is more money in that pool, which of course, not always a certainty, but if there is, there's opportunities to get some additional federal funding there. But that would have to be matched with those same state percentages and city percentages that I showed on the previous slide. And then of course, any costs on the city-only items, which would be the water main and sanitary, those would be 100% city as those costs rise. So we're definitely aware of that as a project team. We are working on developing new preliminary estimates. We expect to have those done within the next month or so. And that's going to give us a lot better idea, of where we stand there. The other thing that's always important to understand with these federal funds is that they kind of have a date, an end date on them, an expiration date. This one is November 2024 as far as how late the project could be bid. So that is a year later than the schedule I gave you earlier. So we do have some slack in that schedule. But of course, we have to just be aware of that those funds would need to be obligated for that bid opening, or they could potentially be lost.
When we were dealing with the state, if I recall, if the bids came in at more than 40% over the engineer estimates, the project would have to be rebid. Would that trigger this as well?
That is correct, Commissioner, at least with, I know that was that a city statute or was that more of a state one?
State,
Brenda?
I think.
State one.
So we have not, this is an estimated cost. So as we get into the actual plans and the details, then we will create an engineer's estimate. And that's when you'll get that increase, that final cost of the project.
So you can do that estimate in light of the increases in costs that everybody's experiencing?
Correct. So we have not created the formal engineer's estimate that you approve it here at Commission yet.
Okay, thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda.
I'm assuming this cost estimate is based on 4 lanes, nothing bigger, or?
That's a good question. Since that was done so long ago, we weren't involved with that. I don't know if anyone at the city.
And I'm assuming we're going to have the same
Recalls that.
problem with the lack of access for machinery like we had on 32nd, which will impact the cost here as well.
It's been such a long time ago since I put this estimate together. I think we at least replaced the existing footprint out there, which would be 4 lanes. And it does include some right-of-way acquisition as well.
Any other questions on that? Okay, great. We'll keep going here. A little bit more background for everyone. So there was a corridor study done and completed in 2013 on this corridor. And that was the starting point for our alternative development. However, that study only recommended a mix of 5-lane sections, essentially. There's a group of them. And when we got together and started this project with our project review committee, there was a desire to take a fresh look at that. Obviously, the section that was used downtown was different than just a 5-lane section. And then we also have, of course, what's happened after COVID with traffic, and then the downtown project did affect traffic on this corridor as well. So we wanted to really take all that into account and take a fresh look at this. So that's what we did, and Jake will talk a little bit more about that here too soon. The one thing we didn't carry forward from the corridor study, there was a linear park concept where essentially all those properties on the north side of Main Avenue would be bought out and turned into some sort of a linear park. And it was decided early with this project, working with our committee, that that was not going to be carried forward at this time. Okay, that's some background. I'm going to do just a little bit here on the traffic process. We're not going to get into too much detail here, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of how we did account for some of the things that have been happening in society in the last few years. So this chart, I think, does kind of boil it down pretty easily. If you look on the left there, those are traffic volumes. So essentially 20,000, 25,000 vehicles per day that are using the corridor. The bottom axis, or the one on the bottom there, would be the year, essentially, as you go out into the future. So you can see, if you look at that orange line where it ends with expected 2021, that's the way that we would normally forecast these projects. So starting back in 2005, you basically establish this is where you're at, and you forecast up. And that number is what we would have expected to see in 2021, that orange dot. But what you can see with that gray dot, when we went out and took traffic counts last year, it was actually about 5,000 vehicles per day less than what that forecast had projected. And of course, a lot of that was just resulted in some of the changes we've seen in the last few years in society. And then again, the downtown project, the counterflow lane, that allows you to turn left, all those things have kind of affected traffic on this corridor. So working with our team, we wanted to make sure we accounted for that. We didn't want to be too aggressive, but we also didn't want to be too conservative. So we ended up picking a point in the middle to account for the fact that there might be some equilibrium coming back here, some bounce back with traffic after COVID, but we don't think it's going to bounce all the way back to that orange line. So you can see the green line is actually what we selected and ended up at about 23,000 vehicles per day out in 2045.
Sorry, can you give us an estimate of when that observed number was in 2021? Towards the end of the year or beginning?
You know, we took counts, I know we had counts in May and we had counts in November. I don't know if you remember, Jake, if that was it might have been the November, that might have been the November 20.
So some of the change could have been perhaps from the redesign of Main Avenue from 25th to the river? Could it have not?
Certainly could have been. Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you. So with that, we took those numbers then and we started really with almost a broad brush. We wanted to see, you know, if we apply a 5-lane to the whole corridor, a 3-lane to the whole corridor, a 4-lane to the whole corridor, what does that do with traffic operations? And then we wanted to take that information and use it to build our alternatives that we would actually look at. So you can see the four things that we looked at. There's 2 of them listed here. We had the existing conditions, which essentially is what's out there now. 5 lanes west of 18th Street, 4 lanes with no turn lanes east of 18th Street. And then we also looked at a 5-lane, a 3-lane, and a 4-lane. And again, just kind of applied those with a broad brush to see what that did to the whole corridor. And it boiled down really to two bullet points there at the end when we looked at those. The no build and the 5-lane concepts had acceptable operations and no congestion. The 3-lane and the 4-lane concepts, when we applied them to the entire corridor, we saw poor operations, delays, and long queues.
How does that translate into calmer traffic in pedestrian, bicycle, people safety?
As far as which section?
The traffic flows, the number of lanes, the speeds, you know, I mean, I hear you. When I hear you say poor operations, delays, and long queues, some of those might be beneficial if we're looking to calm the traffic, slow the traffic, and enhance bicycle, pedestrian, people safety. So I'm just curious what you.
True. It's, yeah, and that's that balance, you know, is trying to balance all those needs of moving vehicles through the corridor and providing access to all the businesses that are along the corridor. But like you said, making sure that we create an environment that's comfortable for all users, not just vehicles, but pedestrians as well.
I guess what my question then is, did we build assumptions in that are to speed up things, or did we build assumptions in that are to slow things down, or to calm traffic down?
I think at this level, and neither Jake or I are the experts on traffic, so hopefully we can answer these questions for you, and if not, we can certainly take them back to our, and we have Jeremy here too. But
There's very few bicycles on this route. It's not a bike route that goes down there, Jeremy. And when you're traveling it's an arterial. People are moving 20,000 cars a day. So it doesn't seem like the same as we have at Main and 8th, John, where it does slow down considerably. When you get on that from 25th out to the interstate, people are moving. They don't seem to be slowing down at all.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Commissioner Strand, that's a good question. This right here, though, is simply vehicles. I mean, we're gonna look at all the modes,
Okay.
but this is just how do vehicles operate. Yeah. And I will say, you know, we have levels of service. You know, A is great, F is awful. Our design needs to get to a level of service D. So, congestion is okay, queues are okay, but you just don't want it where it's, you know, queued up for blocks and blocks where your road is really failing. But I mean, congestion is good for a corridor.
If I could ask a question about the projections on the 3 and 4 lane concepts, is that based on the middle of the road traffic counts that you had on the other graph?
yeah, it is. It's using the green forecast.
And is there an intent to do another traffic count prior to this project? If I remember correctly, the traffic going through on Main Avenue when that project was being looked at, if I remember correctly, 17% of the traffic coming through on Main Avenue was through traffic from the West Fargo side to the Moorhead side. I would think a large portion of those may have been rerouted permanently. So wondering about a retake on the traffic count. That might be a little more accurate.
Well, I can jump in. That's a good comment. Can you go back to that graph? Mm-hmm. So with what we've done downtown, you know, at Broadway, there's just 1 lane each direction. That's where that drop in 2021, where we're showing, occurred. So basically, 5,000 vehicles have said, we're not going through downtown. We're going to take a different route, just because of the delay.
Yeah.
So the green line, the DOT and SRF worked on these percentages. I think it's only a 1% growth. It's a really modest growth.
I guess what I'm saying, however, is that if you're using that as your assumption to project 3 and 4 lanes being not good for traffic, that's what I'm questioning.
Or if you could just, these are great questions. I think some of the next slides might give it a little more context as we're kind of building towards where our alternatives are going. So if we could go through those, then there might be, that might just help with some of the questions too. So, but appreciate the questions. So let's see, we were here, I think. So kind of related to your question, Commissioner Preston, about vehicles doing different things when you go to a 3 or 4 lane concept. One thing that we did notice with that 3 or 4 lane that we would expect is that vehicles would start to divert to other roads. So this is something that our traffic team put together, that they basically with if you had a 3 lane again, you have to remember this is through the entire corridor, that you'd see about 3,000 vehicles divert off to either First Avenue North or Fifth Avenue South or other parallel routes like that. With the 4 lane, it was a little bit less, 1,500. So this was something that again, it's just driver behavior. If we do create that congestion in the corridor, they're going to look for other routes to try to take. So again, that was really kind of our broad brush painting of everything. Then we wanted to take that and dive a little deeper and see, can we use some of these components to build some alternatives that make sense? Because as I mentioned earlier, we have a really tight right-of-way east of 18th Street. So we wanted to try to see if there was some things we could fit in that section that might make sense. And I know that there's a lot here to kind of digest, but bottom line, what we're looking at is we kind of broke the corridor up into components. The intersections and then the portions between the intersections there, you can see 25th to 18th Street and then 18th to University. And in the items in blue, we ended up carrying forward to build our alternatives, which Jake's going to talk about here in a minute, the alternatives that we're looking at. We also looked at the items that are shown in gray. We did want to look at some alternative intersection treatments such as roundabouts, something else called a green T, which I don't believe there's any of those in Fargo yet, but it's an intersection treatment that's used at T intersections sometimes. And then we also did look at raised medians. We looked at controlling access, things like that. So ultimately, though, the items in gray, the project team decided to not continue to carry those forward. So I'm going to sum up here and then turn it over to Jake, and he'll tell you about the alternatives that we actually did start to move forward with on the project. But to try to sum up some of this traffic analysis information, the current capacity, lane capacity, again, for vehicle traffic is adequate for the 2045 traffic. We don't have to add more lanes for vehicle traffic. However, if we try to reduce by 1 lane throughout the entire corridor, we start to see some operational issues. But if you look at the third bullet there, we can combine those things. If we use the existing capacity west of 18th, but we look at reduced lane sections, something a little different than what's out there east of 18th, we did find that did provide acceptable level of service, which was what Jeremy was mentioning earlier. And with that alternative, we didn't see the traffic diversion because we still had that capacity up to 18th Street between, from 25th to 18th. So those are kind of the takeaways that we found from that. A couple other items here too. The crash history on the corridor is higher than average, but it's below what is considered critical. So there wasn't any immediate safety needs out of that related to the crash history, but we of course want to build as much as we can into our designs to improve those situations. And then I already mentioned the high number of access points, and Jake will talk a little bit about that here too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jake.
All right, thank you, Matt. So we'll get into what alternatives that we starting to bring forward through this process based off of the results of the traffic analysis. Would like to point out that there are some goals based off that purpose and need, that all these alternatives were developed to hit. And as Matt alluded to, we broke this corridor out into two different segments, from 25th to 18th, and 18th to University, based off the difference in the corridor widths of the right-of-way that's out there, with 18th University being more of that constrained section. So all the alternatives will have a 5-lane section. That's 2 lanes each direction with a center turn lane from 25th to 18th. That's currently what's out there today. But we will be making improvements to that segment of the corridor. ADA compliance will be improved as well as the pedestrian environment for all the alternatives. We will be providing a continuous center left turn lane. So that's a 2-way left turn lane down the middle for all of our alternatives. This provides vehicles to turn left and not block the flow of traffic. If you know, that 4-lane section between 18th and University today does not have any designated center turn lanes. So anybody trying to turn left into any of those accesses has to do so in the travel lane.
So those left turns, you're probably primarily talking westbound traffic heading south of Main. There's not much reason to go north of Main, or no access points to go to hardly.
Well, there are accesses on the north side of Main, specifically with the
So you're
Asian.
talking like to the businesses?
The businesses, correct, yes. Yep, so this will provide a safe way for the vehicles to get off of the travel way to wait to turn left into the businesses.
I'm sorry, is it, the current lanes, are they 11 feet? Or are you proposing going to 11 feet?
Yeah, they switch a little bit, but for the most part, they are 11 feet.
Okay.
That's what was on the project previous to the east, was 11-foot lanes.
And we're going to 11 feet on 32nd, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of our standard citywide.
And with all the alternatives to that last point is what we talked about, is reducing those driveway access points to create less contact points.
Jeremy, what's the standard width of a pickup?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but
How about a car?
a parking lane, well, 6 feet or less.
6 feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
But no vehicle, even with mirrors, can be wider than 8.5 feet from mirror to mirror, even buses.
So when developing these alternatives, we did develop some criteria as a team. 11-foot lanes, that center turn lane that's in the middle, that would be widened to 12 feet, so additional foot. And then also setting some standards for the pedestrian environment. Sidewalks with minimum of 6 feet wide, boulevards, and that boulevard would be stamped colored concrete that you do see more and more now today, minimum of 4 feet. So that provides a 4-foot separation from the back of curb to the sidewalk from oncoming traffic along Main. And then also where there are buildings, we do look to add an additional 2 feet of width to that right of way or to that building to provide more separation, so you're not so condensed in that walk area. So with the alternatives, we developed 4 different alternatives. One of them, or actually 5 alternatives, but one of them being the no build, which is basically the do nothing option, which is an option that needs to be carried forward through the environmental process. So with this option, no changes are made, everything stays the way it is. Obviously, this does not meet the purpose and need of the project, but it is an option that we do have to carry forward to evaluate for the environmental process. The 5-lane section, and again, all these alternatives, again, between 25th and 18th is going to remain the same as far as the number of lanes, that 5-lane section. So really the discussion is going to focus on that corridor area between 18th and University, the eastern part of the corridor. But with alternative B, 5-lane section, this does carry the 2 lanes, both eastbound and westbound, through the entire project corridor with that center turn lane. And as you recall from the corridor study, there was different options for this 5-lane section with shifting the alignment of the road to impact one side or the other more. But looking at the corridor, we are splitting the impacts between the north and south. So the alignment of the road does not change much It may change this a little bit depending on where we need to minimize impacts to the properties to the north and south. But with this, obviously this is the widest corridor option, so therefore you have the largest amount of right-of-way impacts, as well as impacts to existing buildings that do butt up against the existing likely impacts. There are BNSF properties along this corridor as well on the north side, and 3 of those properties would potentially have impacts with this option. We did look at an option that has 4 lanes between that 18th and University segment. It is currently 4 lanes now, but we would be reducing the westbound to 1 lane with a center turn lane and then 2 eastbound lanes. So really the change is adding that center turn lane and removing one of those westbound lanes. At the intersection of 18th, we would be developing that full 5-lane section, so it would increase the capacity as you're going to the west. So at the intersection, it would be 5 lanes, both on the east and west side of the 18th intersection. And that provides capacity and reduces some of those queuing and queuing lengths that we're talking about in the traffic analysis. With this option and the improvements to the pedestrian facilities, we are still having likely impacts of right-of-way. Not as much as the 5-lane, obviously, but there are still impacts to the properties because it is such a narrow corridor between 18th and University. The 3-lane option is an option, again, 3 lanes now between 18th and University. So that's 1 lane in each direction with that center turn. Again, at 18th, we're still going to develop an additional westbound lane at the intersection, but on the east side, that second eastbound lane would then drop at 18th, so it would be a right turn only at 18th to get your 3 lanes heading to the east.
Is the intention there, or will the result be a dramatic increase in traffic heading south on 18th Street?
I would say that it would be a minimal, but maybe Jeremy can allude to that. Because if they're wanting to get to University, they may take 18th down to First to get to University. There would be a little bit of diversion as a result of that.
Yeah, we kind of do the same thing today at 9th Street as you're heading into downtown. That right lane drops at 9th Street. What this would do is force everybody in the left lane. In the right lane would be pretty barren. So some would take 18th and go south. It's kind of necks it down.
They had a detour this summer when they did some construction, and it was a disaster if you were headed into town, John, because it went down to 1 lane, or you could go down First and around, and just the amount of traffic that takes, it really backs up everything. So if you're headed downtown when they had the detour, I did avoidance. I just didn't do it because it just slowed so much traffic down. I think these 1 lanes would be a disaster. Amount of traffic that sees in the morning. It presently really works well. The main avenue, what deal we did, you all go into 1 lane after University. People have figured it out. It doesn't congest too much, except at the evening when everybody's going back to Moorhead. I think it's somewhat congested every evening.
If I could ask a question about the level of service categories that you're talking about, are those categories A through F, are they assigned based on traffic throughout the entire day, or is it on the worst moments of the day?
It's on the peak hours, either the morning rush or the PM rush.
And all these options, these alternatives, do meet acceptable levels of service on Main Avenue. There would be some significant delay on the side streets, trying to turn when there's no signalized intersection to turn left.
So you're saying this would be an acceptable level of service?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions? With this, obviously, the right-of-way impacts, the likely impacts would be very minimal. We would be able to fit, for the most part, everything within that 60-foot corridor. A little bit more room for the pedestrians as well, because we're not adding additional lanes to that. So the pedestrian environment would be enhanced a little bit more than the 5-lane or the 4-lane with this option. We did also look at a 4-lane section, what we could do to reduce those likely impacts. So this option is being carried forward to look at as well, keeping in mind that we reduce some of the impacts, but not all the impacts from a right-of-way standpoint. But it also does reduce some of those widths for the pedestrian environment. And I'll go through those here next. So again, this is the same option as alternative C1, the 4-lane, is just modified to reduce the footprint a little bit to minimize some of those likely impacts. And what those are, again, we're still meeting the criteria that we wanted to meet with the purpose and need, but we would reduce the outside lane width, so that's the furthest north and furthest south lane, to 10.5 feet. You'd still have your 2-foot gutter to the curb, but that 10.5 feet would be reduced. The center left turn would reduce from a 12 to 11 foot. And then the sidewalk widths, the minimum sidewalk widths that we would hit we would try to shoot for in those constrained areas is 4-foot width with a narrower boulevard. And there's different widths that go along this corridor. We would still try to hit the desired, which would be that 6-foot walk with the 4-foot boulevard. But in the areas from that picture that Matt showed in that constrained area, we got a building on the north and south side, some of those pinch points. That's where that flexibility with the design would allow us to narrow up the sidewalks and the boulevard to fit it within the existing corridor as best we can. But once you get past those constraints, then it would go back out to the desired section.
So where would bicycles go? On the sidewalk? Or do you anticipate they'd mix with the traffic flow?
But the bicycles would go on the sidewalk. This isn't a bicycle route. I think there's designated bicycle routes on First Avenue South. So we would want to direct them there if at all possible, but obviously you can't control that. So in these instances where there are narrower sidewalks in small areas, and when we're talking small areas, I mean, it's at the building footprint. So 60 feet, 100 feet areas of where these reduced widths would occur. Yes, it would be more constrained for the bicyclists to travel on there if there are bicycles on the corridor. Any more questions?
So can I add something? This is where, as designers and as project folks, we don't want to impact too many buildings, but we also want to right size the sidewalk. So this is where, is a 6-foot space from a building to the curb, is that not enough if we're going to start with a new road section that's going to last 40 years? Is 6 feet enough? Or is 8 feet better? Or is 10 feet ideal? So these are the things we kind of want you to think about. Because you can see how tight the corridor is out there today in spots. Do we want to, there's always minimums. Do you want to design to the minimum, or do you want to design to the preferred or ideal? So just plant a seed so you can see the things that everything kind of gets sacrificed
Jeremy,
to not have building impacts.
I'm guessing you'll probably want to make sure that snow removal equipment can get through there. I'm not sure how wide a Bobcat is or equipment that people use for snow removal, but you'd want them to be able to clean the sidewalks.
Yeah, and this is a situation where it's all hard surface from the curb to the right away. I would imagine Ben would be probably plowing it once, then coming back and pulling it off and hauling it out. I assume that's. So the snow is going to be definitely an issue. So yeah, you talk about how wide is a skid steer. They like it wider than 6 for sure.
Jeremy, can you tell me how wide the combined bike path and sidewalks are in the rest of the city? Are they 10 feet?
So our standard shared use path using federal aid has to be 10 feet wide.
10?
I
Okay.
mean, we used to get by with 8 feet, but now they say thou shalt not go less than 10 feet unless it's super confined.
Okay.
Right, and in these constrained, in these constrained areas too, where we would have to reduce those widths to minimize those impacts, we wouldn't have any obstacles, vertical obstacles in that reduced width section, light poles or any of that. There wouldn't be an additional obstacle for pedestrians. Those would occur after those constraints.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it in context, 4 feet versus 10 feet.
No, I think the next slide is going to be a good one for you.
Yep. So we did go along the corridor, and this is actually on the corridor that was just completed here a couple of years ago to really give that context of what would a reduced section look like versus that ultimate section that you're wanting to achieve along the corridor. So here's just one person walking. You can see on the very far left, this is a 7-foot spacing between the back of curb and that structure, that building. It's a narrow boulevard. You have about a 5-foot sidewalk in this segment. Other one here, you got 8.5 feet from that retaining wall. You could assume that's a building too. In this circumstance, you have a 4-foot boulevard and then a 4.5-foot sidewalk. And then as you go down the line here, the wider options as well provide, obviously a better pedestrian environment. And then we also did look at what it would look like at a side-by-side. 2 pedestrians passing each other along each of these different segments. So as you can see, the wider the sidewalk, obviously the better it is for the pedestrians passing each other.
So the one thing just to note is the segment we're talking about wouldn't have on-street parking.
Right.
So there would be, in downtown, we have primarily parking to protect the pedestrians, sidewalk to moving traffic. In this stretch, we wouldn't. So it's just something to think about as well.
Yep, that's correct. So the one on the far right, there is a 2-foot boulevard, but you can kind of see the jointing there when you look at the tree planter. If you would bring that boulevard all the way to the edge of that tree plant, that'd be your 4-foot wide boulevard. So that's your 6-foot walk with a 4-foot boulevard segment that we were discussing earlier. So some of the likely, this is more of a summary on the likely property impacts, just taken from the previous slides and brought in here for a side-by-side comparison. So as you can see, obviously the 5-lane is the most likely impacts to property. And then as you narrow the lanes and the pedestrian environment, it gets less impactful. And then talking about access management, there are approximately 80 driveways along this mile stretch. We did work very closely with the property owners, the business owners along this stretch. We held workshops that we invited them to come and discuss with us their property, how they use their property. And we also identified, if they have multiple access points within their property, are there opportunities to minimize or combine access points without impacting their operations of their property and their business. And the results of that, we were able to close 21 of those driveways, of those 80 driveways, and we're still working with some of the landowners on 8 of them. So that's potentially a reduction in 29 driveways, or 36% reduction of what's out there today. It's been a really good process, and the property owners have been great to work with, and very, very helpful and easy to work alongside us on this. And those will continue to, those property owner conversations will continue throughout the project development as alternatives are selected and locations of driveways are finalized.
In your analysis, do you overlay history of pedestrian, bicycle, traffic accidents in this corridor?
We do take that into account, yes. I don't know if you're familiar with a couple of these, but there's mirrors that are attached to the building because of sight distance issues. As part of our process, we do identify those and try to improve the safety of those as well.
At some point, I'd be curious what that information looks like, but anecdotally, it would seem to me that what I would recall are pedestrians crossing Main that seem to get hit. I don't know if I remember, but that's what I see. I seem to remember a few instances of people interacting with the traffic in a deadly way.
Yeah, I think the most problematic spot would be the intersection at University and Main. That's just got a lot of things going on with it. Off the top of my head, I can't think of too many issues we've had to the west of University.
Or
But we can look at that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that.
So I'm going to make one quick request. This is great conversation and very appreciated, but I know I'm trying to be respectful of your hour too, and we have quite a few more slides to get through. So if you guys maybe let our consultants kind of finish up their slides, and then we'll try and get to all those questions. And if we can't, then please let us know what else you have, and we'll try and get you all the answers. Right now, we're just looking at all the different options, and so this dialogue really helps, just trying to be respectful of your time.
Right. Yep. I'm wrapping up here, and then Matt will close it out here. So we'll get to further discussion. Just real quick, we did look at an option, and that is to add a median at 17th Street. As you can see, the 17th Street and 18th Street are pretty close spacing in between them, and with the 18th being a signal, some of that, when there's a red light, some of that backs up and just produces more conflict points. So adding a median would be a right in, right out only movement. And if you do recall, 17th Street is a one block street from Main to First, and then there's nothing south of that. So we looked at this option just to improve safety a little bit, reduce some of that access try to improve some of that access management as well. And then streetscaping opportunities, depending on the section of the sidewalk and the boulevard, we are looking at providing landscaping opportunities along the corridor. These are just some of the criteria there are a number of billboards along this 1 mile corridor as well that restrict any plantings within a certain zone as you get close to that billboard. But we are looking at these different options of planting beds where possible. With some of the constraints, the planting beds are a little bit less of an option, but there are some options to add those. But tree grates, adding some trees along the corridor, and then also parking lot separation too, when there's parking lots adjacent to the sidewalk. We're looking at different options to separate that a little more. We are just going to show just a really, really quick clip of some 3D visualizations that we've developed. These are very preliminary, and this is only showing that stretch from 18th to 25th. We're currently working on this, but this is something that we're going to provide as part of the public engagement process, and to really show what the corridor could look like with the different alternatives. So I'll let this play just real briefly here. We'll wrap up. So you're approaching 18th Street here at the signalized intersection. So with this option, you have the 4-foot boulevards with the 6-foot sidewalk and tree planting options. These tree planting options aren't finalized by any means. It's just representative of what could occur out there. So this will go all the way to 25th, but we're not going to run it that far because but you can see the different driveway locations along the corridor. This does include where we did reduce some of those driveways, so those would be represented up on here as well. All right, and then lastly, for mine, we are in the process of analyzing and comparing these. The top example is what was used for the last project between University and Second Street, is really identifying what are those characteristics we want, what are the evaluation criteria. And the below is some of the criteria that we developed as part of this corridor that we're going to be evaluating. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have a little bit more detail as far as how we develop the criteria and analyze it, but the color coding system, which is great, moderate, or poor, of how it meets the purpose and need of each of those evaluation criteria. So I will pass it back to Matt to finish up.
Okay, thanks, Jake. I promise you we're almost done. I've just got a few other slides here. We do appreciate your patience and the questions too. It's really good discussion. So I just wanted to highlight a few things to be aware of. We've talked a lot about some of the alternatives, but Jake alluded to it. Public involvement is very important to us on this project. We've worked hard from the beginning to try to do this the right way and get off to the right foot, or get off on the right foot with all of the businesses and properties and neighborhoods. So just wanted to highlight some of the things we've been doing. We, of course, met with the businesses and landowners a couple times. We've spoken with the board of the Jefferson Area Neighborhood Association, which of course is the neighborhood directly to the south of Main Avenue here. And then we do have our first public input meeting planned here for October 18th. So that's going to be coming up soon as well. We've kind of talked about this as we've gone along, but the right-of-way and then also BNSF coordination is really important on this project. It's going to be a factor. They do have a spur crossing towards the west end. It only carries about 2 trains a week, but it's something that we do have to work with them on and look at. Hopefully, we're hoping to tie in or be done with our improvements before we get to that crossing, but that's still to be determined. And then BNSF does own 4 properties on the north side, and I think some are probably familiar with the ones there, primarily in the center of the project around the 18th Street area. So any acquisition that we have to do there, we would, of course, have to deal with BNSF. Finally, just wanted to point out some possible schedule concerns. I talked about the schedule at the beginning. Obviously, if we get into building impacts, business relocations, depending on which alternative is selected, that could definitely push this schedule out. I think those typically can take 9 to 12 months through the DOT's experience dealing with those business relocations. So that's just something to be aware of, in addition to the BNSF coordination that I mentioned earlier. And then as far as construction goes, we're still evaluating the construction timeline. It'd be great to get it done in 1 season, but we don't know enough about it yet. Possible that it could extend to 2 seasons, so we're still in the process of evaluating that. But the intent is to detour, very similar to the downtown Main Avenue project, detour through traffic a few blocks at a time. Of course, maintain the business access through the process as well. And then the last thing I wanted to update you on, and then we'll open it up for any questions. With this being on the U.S. highway system, we did need to present to DOT management and get their input and decisions on how to move forward. And their recommendation, after seeing a similar presentation that we gave to you today, was to carry forward all the alternatives except the 5-lane alternative, which was alternative B. That would be the 5-lane through the entire corridor. They considered that to be too impactful to property and buildings. So certainly can answer any questions about that as well. But so moving forward from there, we're going to just develop as much detailed information as we can on property, building, and business relocation costs, in addition, of course, to project costs, just to have the right information to inform the decision-making going forward. So with that, we are done with the presentation, and we'll welcome any questions.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. It's for Jeremy. Jeremy, can we, obviously the previous section, to me, that went very well, the construction part of it, I guess. Is that kind of the same model we're going to follow for this, where we had, I mean, from the perspective of the businesses and stuff, can you talk a little bit about that thing?
Yeah, there's no way we can allow traffic to go through there during construction. So we would bite 2 or 3 blocks at a time.
But are we gonna phase it? Because that's what we did. We went from the river to Broadway and split it up.
Yeah, I mean, those are still to come. Yep, that's exactly what we're going to do. We always phase it, and then it's up to you guys to decide incentives too, to knock out phases or intersections a little bit quicker than others.
So, Mr. Chair, and the other thing is we did those incentives for early completion, and that, I mean, I thought went very well on Main Avenue, where there was a lot more businesses where they were directly impacted. And so I would encourage us to do that same system, because I thought that went about as well as we could hope. Thank you.
It seems that when you drive that up to 18th, it might be a 4-lane versus the 5-lane. I missed that in your alternatives. Was that one of your alternatives? Because presently you'll have some people taking a left-hand turn. It works. People make it through there, but there's a real narrow where the international market is. And the international market, does that mean that would be the one business you have to remove? It's the only one I know you have mirrors and it's difficult in and out.
Yeah, so I guess to answer the first part of your question, we have some alternatives that reduce the lanes. There's one alternative that reduces that down to 3 lanes in that stretch between.
So
18th
I'm just saying,
University.
leave a 4-lane, take your center lane out, and then just do your center lane thereafter. Is that an alternative?
That would be essentially the no build alternative, which is leaving it the way it is. And we don't have any build alternatives, maybe is the way to.
Well, it's just that you're
that
narrow
section.
from 17th University. I don't care what you are, you're narrow in your right of way. You have difficulties with buildings on each side. But when you're from 17th on, you have the ability to put your central lane in. You're not considering doing that?
To just have 2 lanes each direction in that
Exactly
stretch.
this picture as an alternative.
We don't have that section as a build alternative. That was discussed. But ultimately, I guess it was decided with the team that it didn't meet the purpose and need to put that section back. That's a section that probably isn't, of course you had to fit it in here, but it's not really implemented as much anymore with new projects. A lot of times those are being reduced down to a 3-lane with the center turn lane. I think there's examples in Fargo down on
The road,
42nd and those areas.
the roadway footprint of the 4-lane is the same number of lanes that are out there today. It's just you change one of those westbound through lanes to that center turn lane.
No, I'm following that, but if you look at the businesses that are north and south there, if you go along Main Avenue, many of the businesses on the south aren't frequently a left-hand turn in. I mean, it's a car lot, it's different things that are on that side. My curiosity is presently through cars do pretty well. Now you're going to have a pinch point here, and then you'd have a pinch point when you get closer to downtown Fargo, Broadway, as you pinch into that one. So you'd have 2 double pinch points. If you come west on University on Main to University, that's a busy intersection. North, south, east, west. Either people are taking right, left, whatever they're doing. But it would almost seem that you're going to have a pinch point here if you go to 3 lanes. Correct?
I think there was some queuing, and we'd have to look back. It did meet the acceptable level of service, like I think Jake mentioned. We'd have to look back at the details of that, when we ran the analysis on those to see what the delays in queuing were. But it's a good point you're making. Yeah, you're gonna carry 2 westbound lanes through University, and then you're gonna reduce it with those alternatives down to 1 lane.
Well, I know at one
expand
time we
that
looked at
out.
Maine, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, we were going to buy all the northern properties out so we could build this right? We're going to have it wide enough and hit pinch points, and to John's concern, pedestrian walkaway, everything. And then somehow it flipped. We quit thinking about buying the northern stuff.
Yeah, so the 5-lane section, that's excess capacity. What's out there today could work as it sits. So you don't need to add a lane just to take out a bunch of buildings. But that still gets back to our 4-lane option. Even the 4-lane option with adequate sidewalk widths would acquire a number of buildings.
Will there be any changes in speeds through these corridors? Or how do you anticipate the traffic speeds to be set at?
The existing speed limit, I believe, is 30, and it would remain.
That would stay the same?
That way, yeah.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Work in progress.
Yeah, there's more to come on this. We just want to get this in front of you. There's a lot of moving parts with this evaluation. So you'll be back and we'll be back in front of you before too long.
Yeah, I just advise all our commissioners to drive that corridor and see what's going on now. It's kind of an interesting corridor. And also look at it from the business point of view. And I'm very pleased you're working with the businesses because I've heard a fair amount from them wanting to be involved. So I'm glad you're doing that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.